You know, my dears, there's a question I've carried with me for 60 years, and I never thought I'd speak it aloud. How well do we really know the people we love most? I spent half my life believing that loyalty was as simple as a wedding ring and a whispered promise. I believed that family meant something sacred, something that couldn't be broken no matter how hard the world pushed. But sometimes, my dears, the cruelest betrayals don't come from strangers or enemies. They come from the people whose hands you've held since childhood. Looking back now, I realize that the most devastating moments in life are often preceded by the smallest signs. A glance held a second too long, a secret phone call in the pantry, the way someone's voice changes when they think you're not listening. I missed them all, or perhaps I simply didn't want to see my name is Eleanor Margaret Hartwell, and I'm 77 years old now. This story happened in 1972, though the wounds took decades to truly heal. But before I continue, my dears, please take just a moment and like this video for me. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our stories. And won't you tell me in the comments where you're watching from today? I'd love to know. I was 32 years old in 1972, living in the small town of Millbrook, Vermont, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and that was considered a blessing. We lived on Maple Street, in a white Victorian house with black shutters and a wraparound porch where my husband, David, would sit on summer evenings with a glass of lemonade, waving to neighbors as they passed. You know, my dears, I thought I had everything a woman could want. David was a bank manager, respected, handsome in that steady, reliable way. He had salt and pepper hair even then, though he was only 35, the kind of man who opened doors for his wife and remembered to compliment her Sunday roast. Our 3 children, Michael, who was 13, Susan, my middle child at 11, and little James, just 8. They were the pride of our community. I was a school teacher, teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary. Every morning, I'd wake at 5:30, press my cotton dresses, pin my hair just so, and prepare breakfast for my family. Scrambled eggs with cream, toast with real butter, fresh squeezed orange juice if we could afford it. My children never went to school hungry. My husband never went to work without a packed lunch wrapped in wax paper. We were the family people pointed to. The Hartwells. Look at them, mothers would say. Look at how Eleanor keeps that house. Look at how David provides. Our church, the First Methodist on Elm Street, knew us by name. Reverend Hutchins would smile at us during services, nod with approval. We donated regularly. We volunteered. We were good people, my dears. We were so very, very good. My sister, Catherine, 3 years younger than me, she lived just 2 blocks away. She worked as a nurse at the county hospital, and we'd have lunch together most Saturdays, always at Miller's Diner on Main Street. She'd order the tuna salad on toast. I'd have the chicken sandwich, and we'd share a slice of their famous apple pie with cinnamon. Those lunches, my dears, I thought they were the most permanent thing in my life. It started so small that I almost didn't notice a shift here, an oddness there, nothing you could point to and say, that's wrong. But looking back now, I can see where the cracks began to form. In March of 1972, David stopped attending church with us. He said his back was troubling him, that the wooden pews aggravated it. I bought him a cushion. He still didn't come. By May, he was going out on Saturday nights, saying he had meetings with clients from the bank. In a small town like Millbrook, you don't simply meet clients on Saturday nights. Everyone knew the businesses were closed. Where exactly are these meetings? I asked him once, trying to sound casual while I wiped down the kitchen counter. Different places, he said, loosening his tie. Sometimes the country club, sometimes private homes. You know how it is, Eleanor. Networking, I did know. Or at least, I thought I did. That was the problem. Catherine stopped coming to our Saturday lunches. She said her shifts at the hospital had become unpredictable. I might get called in, she'd say over the telephone. I'm so sorry, Ellie. Let's try next week. Next week never came. In July, I noticed that David had started locking the garage at night, something he'd never done before. When I asked him why, he said there had been some break-ins on the other side of town, and he was simply being cautious. I accepted this. I was good at accepting things. You see, I was very good at it. My neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Chen, who lived across the street, she noticed things too. One afternoon in August, she came to my door with a baked good she'd made, a lovely mocha cake, and while I was making tea, she mentioned that she'd seen David's Chevrolet parked near the Riverside Motel on Route 9 several times. The Riverside Motel was out on the highway, nothing but a place for traveling salesmen. And, well, I'm sure there's an explanation, I told her, though my hands were shaking as I poured the tea. Of course, dear, she said gently, and I could see the pity in her eyes. I hated her for that pity. I wasn't ready to be pitied. In September, I found a receipt in David's jacket pocket rolled up in the inner lining. It was from a men's clothing store in the next town over, dated August 16th. But the purchase was strange. Size 7 shoes, a pale blue dress, size 6, a wig in honey blonde. The total was $67.43, an enormous sum for us then. I held that receipt in my trembling hands for an hour. sitting at my kitchen table while the house was quiet. I didn't show it to anyone. I didn't even ask him about it. Instead, I put it back in his jacket and pretended I'd never seen it. Who would have thought that this small piece of paper would change everything? The discovery didn't come the way it should have, with dignity, with privacy, with time to process. It came the way the worst things do, suddenly, brutally, in front of God and everyone. It was Saturday, September 23rd, 1972, a warm afternoon. Michael was at a soccer game. Susan was at her friend's house, and little James was in the backyard with a bucket of bubbles. I was making peach pie for the church bake sale the next morning. The telephone rang. I remember wiping my floury hands on my apron, a green gingham apron my mother had given me before I answered. "Is this Eleanor Hartwell?" A woman's voice, formal and clipped. "Yes, this is she. This is Officer Patricia Mullins from the Millbrook Police Department. I'm calling to inform you that your husband has been in an incident. He's at the county hospital. You'll want to come right away." The pie, I remember I didn't even turn off the oven. At the hospital, I found David in a private room on the second floor. And my dears, when I saw him, my legs nearly gave out. His face was swollen on one side, his left eye bruised purple and black. But what made me understand that something was deeply, catastrophically wrong with what was hanging in a garment bag on the back of the door. A woman's dress, a beautiful emerald green dress that I'd never seen before. "Eleanor," David said, his voice hoarse. "I can explain." "Explain what?" I asked, though my voice didn't sound like mine. And then Officer Mullins, standing by the window, began to tell me what had happened. David had been at the Riverside Motel, of course he had, but he hadn't been there alone. He'd been there with Catherine, my sister, and they hadn't been having an affair, though I would have almost preferred that simple sin. No, my dears, it was something far more twisted than that. David had been living a secret life for 18 months. He would go to that motel on Friday and Saturday nights, sometimes midweek, when he told me he had clients to visit. And in that motel room, registered under the assumed name Robert Marshall, my husband would transform himself. He would put on that honey blonde wig, slide into the pale blue dress and women's shoes, and he would become someone else entirely. And Catherine, my own sister, she was his accomplice, his participant. She would help him dress. She would go out in public with him, pretending he was a friend from out of town. They'd gone to restaurants, to movie theaters, once to a fair in the next county over. The fight that landed David in the hospital happened when Mr. Harold Finch, Catherine's own fiancé, who had proposed to her just 3 weeks prior, discovered them together at the motel. He'd been checking rooms, apparently looking for something he'd left behind, and he found them. He found David in a full face of makeup, wearing a slip and stockings, and Catherine sitting on the bed looking at him with an expression of such tenderness that Mr. Finch said later it took him a moment to understand what he was actually seeing. He hit David. He hit him hard, not because of what David was, though I suppose that was partly it, but because he understood that the woman he'd planned to marry was involved in something so deceptive, so elaborate, that his entire understanding of who she was had been obliterated. Catherine had run from the motel. No one had seen her since. The day the story broke in the Millbrook Gazette, September 25, 1972. A Monday, I didn't read it myself. I didn't have to. Everyone in town had read it for me and had already formed their opinions. The headline was small but devastating. Local banker questioned in motel incident. Scandal rocks respected family. The article didn't say exactly what David had been doing, but it didn't need to. People understood, or rather, people made their own assumptions, and half of those were worse than the truth. David was suspended from the bank. Within a week, he was asked to resign. The bank manager's wife doesn't remain employed, they said, when her husband is involved in such conduct. Never mind that I'd done nothing wrong. Never mind that I was as much a victim of deception as anyone. My principal called me into his office on the Thursday after the story broke. Mr. William Henderson was a kind man, or I had thought he was, but there was no kindness in his face that afternoon. Eleanor, he said, not meeting my eyes, I think it would be best if you took a leave of absence, for the children's sake, for the school's sake, until this all settles down. A leave of absence? I asked, though I understood perfectly. We can't have the teachers at this school being caught up in such circumstances. The parents are already asking questions. He was firing me. He was doing it gently, with euphemisms and false concern, but he was firing me nonetheless. I lost my job. My sister had disappeared, simply vanished from Millbrook, and we never heard from her again. Not directly. Later, we'd learned she'd moved to California, changed her name, started a new life. She never contacted me. Not one word, not one apology. My husband, he was a broken thing. He sat in our living room during the day, staring at nothing, occasionally trying to explain something I didn't want to hear. It's not what you think, he'd say. I don't think anything. I'd tell him coldly, I simply don't care. But the children, my dears, the children suffered most of all. Michael, 13 years old, and suddenly aware of every whisper, every pointing finger. came home from school with a black eye one day. He'd gotten in a fight with a boy who'd called David something unspeakable. Michael wouldn't talk about it. He'd go to school, come home, and sit in his room with the door closed. Susan, at 11, became something different. She became angry in a way that no child should be. She'd slam doors, speak harshly to me for things that weren't my fault, as if she needed to push away from all of us to survive. Little James, sweet James, he stopped playing in the yard with his friends. He'd sit inside, looking out the window, confused about why people looked at him differently now. And me, I was a ghost in my own house, a woman who'd been made complicit in deception simply by being married to it. The church ladies, the ones I'd sat with in the pews, the ones I'd hosted at my table, they began to distance themselves. Perhaps Eleanor knew. I'd overhear in the grocery store. Perhaps she enabled it. How could they think such things? And yet, I understood their logic, because I was beginning to think it myself. David left in October. He packed a suitcase one afternoon while I was at the grocery store, and he left a note on the kitchen table. I can't stay here, it said. I can't look at what I've destroyed every day. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm so very sorry. I never heard from him again. Not a letter, not a phone call, not even divorce papers for 3 years. The cold set in early that year. It was still only November when the first real frost came to Millbrook. I had $247 in a savings account. David didn't know about emergency money, the kind a sensible woman keeps for truly terrible times. I now understood that this was exactly what terrible times meant. I couldn't get a teaching position anywhere in Vermont. News travels quickly in small states, and no superintendent wanted the scandal or the distraction. So I did what I had to do. Monday through Friday, I worked at Morris's Laundry on the south side of town, the part where people still had to work with their hands. The work was brutish and necessary. I'd arrive at 5 in the morning, before anyone I knew might see me, and I'd spend the next 9 hours handling other people's clothes. The machines were enormous industrial things, violent and loud. The chemicals: Clorox, ammonia. The specialized starch solution burned my hands until they cracked and bled. My nails turned yellow. My fingernails came loose. I wrapped my hands in bandages, and still the work continued. By noon, my back would be screaming. By 3 o'clock, my feet standing all day on concrete would feel like they didn't belong to my body anymore. I'd go home at 2:30 to pick James up from school, and I'd hold him without letting him hug me too tightly, because my back couldn't bear it. But laundry work wasn't enough. On Saturday mornings, I began baking. I'd wake at 3 in the morning and start mixing bread, cinnamon rolls, apple turnovers, sugar cookies, chocolate chip cookies. I used butter that seemed obscene in cost, fresh eggs, real vanilla extract that I bought one small bottle of and made last for months. By 9 in the morning, my kitchen smelled like heaven. By 10, I'd loaded boxes of baked goods into the car and driven to the farmer's market on the edge of town, where I'd set up a small table and sell until 1 in the afternoon. Most people didn't know the baked goods came from Eleanor Hartwell. The label just said Hartwell's Home Baking. That distance, that small anonymity was everything. The money was meager, truly, some weeks. The laundry and the baking combined gave me $70. Other weeks, maybe 100 if I'd had good sales on the baked goods. $70 a week. And I had a mortgage of $60 a month, property taxes, utilities, groceries. Susan needed a new coat. Michael's shoes were wearing through at the heel. There were nights I'd sit in the dark kitchen without turning on the electric light. To save the few pennies that cost, and I'd weep so silently that even I could barely hear it. In the evenings, I became a tutor. Parents who might have shunned me were willing enough to hire me. When it came to helping their children with math or reading, I'd go to their homes, an hour a night, 3 evenings a week, $5 a session. I cleaned houses on Sundays, $5 here, 7 there, bathrooms, kitchens, floors on my hands and knees with a bucket of soapy water, scrubbing other people's dirt so I could feed my own children. This went on for 3 years. My dears, 3 years of this relentless, aching, bone-grinding labor. My hands became something unrecognizable rough as tree bark, nails broken, skin cracked from the chemicals and the hot water. I'd look at them sometimes and feel a kind of distant grief, as if those hands belonged to someone else, someone I used to be. Michael grew distant and hard. He took a job at 14 at the local hardware store on weekends, determined to help. I'd find money on my dresser that he'd left without saying anything his entire paycheck, sometimes, or most of it. It broke my heart that my son felt he needed to do that. Susan became brilliant in a sharp-edged way. At 13, she was helping me with the finances, figuring out which bills absolutely had to be paid and which could wait another month. A child should never have to think about such things. And James, sweet James, he grew into a quiet, careful boy. He'd help me prepare the baked goods on Saturday mornings without being asked. And he never once complained about our circumstances. It came in the spring of 1975, 3 years almost to the day since. David had left. I was at Miller's Diner, the place where Catherine and I used to eat lunch together, and I was cleaning tables as part of my evening work. I did this on Mondays now, $5 for 3 hours of work. Reva and Hutchins came in with Harold Finch, the man who'd punched David all those years ago. I didn't know they were connected. I didn't know they'd become friends after everything, bound together by shared horror and, later, by shared healing. Rever and Hutchins had counseled Harold through his own dark spiral after Catherine disappeared. They'd spent hours in the church together, talking about betrayal and forgiveness and the complexity of the human heart. I was wiping down the counter behind where they were sitting when I heard Harold say, "I heard Eleanor's been teaching again, tutoring people's children. She has," Rever and Hutchins said, quietly, "extraordinarily well. I'm told she shouldn't have to live like she's invisible." Harold said Dot, and the Reverend said something I'll never forget. "No, she shouldn't. She's been more honest and more faithful in her suffering than most of us have ever been in our comfort." They didn't know I was listening. The next Sunday, Reverend Hutchins surprised me during the service. I'd been sitting in the back because I still didn't feel welcome in the pews where I used to sit. "I'd like to speak about shame," he began his sermon, "about the difference between shame that we deserve and shame that's been unfairly placed upon us. I'd like to speak about Eleanor Hartwell." The church went silent. "Eleanor has been walking through this town these past 3 years with dignity and grace in circumstances that would have broken many of us. She has worked multiple jobs, raised 3 children alone, and asked nothing from this community. And yet this community has given her nothing in return except judgment and distance." He looked directly at me. "I think it's time," he said, "that we remembered what we're supposed to be. And I think it's time that we asked Eleanor's forgiveness for our own failures." After the service, people approached me. Not everyone, not the mayor's wife, certainly, who'd led the charge in shunning me, but enough. Genuine people, parents who'd used me as a tutor, neighbors who'd bought my baked goods, people who'd simply watched and been ashamed of their own cowardice. An older woman, I barely knew, Mrs. Helen Sutton, who must have been nearly 80. Then she took my hand in both of hers. "I knew your mother," she said. "God rest her soul. She was the finest person I ever knew. And you're just like her. I'm sorry we made you suffer. I'm truly sorry." She used her connections. Mrs. Sutton's late husband had owned one of the banks before it merged, to get word to the principal at the school. Within a month, I was offered a position again, starting in September, by 1976. I was teaching full-time again. The baking business, which had become known as Hartwell's Home Baking, had grown enough that I hired 2 other women to help me. We were supplying goods to Miller's Diner and to other restaurants in town. By 1980, we had a small storefront on Sycamore Street. By 1985, Hartwell's Bakery was the most well-known bakery in 3 counties. Michael graduated high school and went to medical school. He's a doctor now, a surgeon, actually in Boston. He has 2 beautiful children of his own. Susan went to law school and practices family law. Believe it or not, she helps women in situations like mine were. She says helping them is how she heals. James became a teacher, just like I was. He teaches English literature at the high school here in Millbrook. He married a lovely woman, and they have 3 children. All of them came from a place of darkness, but they've built beautiful, meaningful lives. As for me, I became something I never expected, a woman of some renown in our region. The bakery was written up in magazines. We received awards for our products. We gave back to the community, scholarships to students, donations to the women's shelter that opened in 1982, support for the church. I remarried in 1989. His name was Robert. He was a widower, a kind man who'd been watching me quietly for years. We had a peaceful marriage, not passionate, but genuine and sweet. We had 12 good years together before he passed. My grandchildren, all 8 of them, they know their grandmother as a woman who survived. They know that resilience isn't about not breaking. It's about rebuilding yourself piece by piece. As for David, I learned through the years that he'd moved to California, to a city where he could live more openly. He died alone in 1998 without ever reaching out to his children or asking for their forgiveness. I felt sadness for him. Eventually, he'd been so afraid, and that fear had destroyed everything good in his life. And Catherine, I never forgave her, though I've made my peace with it. People ask me sometimes if I'd want to see her, talk to her, understand her. I wouldn't. Some betrayals cut too deeply. Some bonds, once broken, cannot be reforged. You know, my dears, I've learned something important through all of this. Strength isn't about never falling down. Strength is what you do when you're already broken, when there's nothing left to lose, and you still choose to stand up. Strength is washing clothes with bleeding hands and baking bread at 3 in the morning because your children need to eat. Strength is forgiving the community that shunned you, even though you have every right to hold a grudge. I've also learned that the worst thing we can do to each other isn't honesty, even brutal honesty. The worst thing is deception. The worst thing is secrecy. The worst thing is making someone complicit in a lie simply by loving them. Looking back now, at 77, with a successful business, brilliant children, and beautiful grandchildren, I can see that period of suffering as what it was, a passage. It was dark, and it was difficult, and it tested me in ways I couldn't have imagined. But it was also a gift in its way. It taught me who I really was underneath all the easy contentment of my perfect life. It taught me that I was stronger than I knew. So my message to any of you watching this who are in the darkness right now, whether it's betrayal or loss or circumstance or anything else that's trying to keep you down, my message is this. You are stronger than you know. Your hands can do more than you think. Your heart can endure more than seems possible. And eventually, if you keep working, keep loving your children, keep showing up with your hands and your heart, you'll find yourself on the other side of the darkness. You'll find yourself not just surviving, but thriving. Thank you for listening to me today. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next stories. Share this with someone who might be needing a little hope. Where are you watching from? Leave it in the comments. I'd love to know. God bless you, my dears.